Hey there, everybody. I'm Steve Loflin, and I want to thank you for tuning in for a little bit of ScholarScoop, where we talk about all things related to college, career, and life. And today is an especially great day because I have my longtime friend, Bill Keys, joining us, who really knows a lot about college, career, and life. And he also has a new book out, which I want to talk about. So Bill Keys, thank you so much for spending some time with me on ScholarScoop today. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. And already I'm excited about this time we get to spend together because you introduced me as your longtime friend, which I can't think of anything I'm more proud of than that.
Oh, well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for this conversation. I don't know if you remember this, and it really lines up with your book in a lot of ways because what you wrote about is actually what you do. And I don't know if that's true for everybody when they write a book, but I don't know if you remember, but you called me out of the blue, probably like 22 or so years ago. It was before you actually started the Institute. And you told me that your daughter, Lola Elizabeth, had been invited to join NSCS, the National Society of Collegiate Scholars, at Spelman College. And you were reviewing that invitation, and you would love to come and chat with me about the organization and why I started it. Do you remember that at all?
You know what? I don't. I don't.
I do. I remember that so well. And the reason that I remember it so well is because the way that you presented it was, I'm really excited about this for my daughter, and I want to know more about how this works and what was your reasoning for starting it. And I think that conversation is really what led, I believe, to us having this more than 20-year friendship, which I always look forward to spending time with you. So thank you for reaching out. I know that is one of the things that you like to tell your scholars about all the time in terms of connecting and networking and all of those things, which we'll get into in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But I think a good place to start with some ScholarScoop is to tell a little bit about your story. I really do appreciate the way that you made some decisions about how you wanted your life journey to unfold and how you took a lot of initiative. And so why don't you take just a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about your growing up in a small North Carolina town and your decision to come to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Well, I will gladly do that. But before I do, I don't think I've given you enough credit for the fact that I'm sitting here now, 23 years into doing the work that I'm doing at the Institute for Responsible Citizenship. I probably called you because I thought I can learn something from this guy. And so I should give you a lot of credit for that now, because you probably gave me ideas that helped really ground what we've created, which has been just extraordinarily successful. But it probably wouldn't have been had I not had those early conversations with you. So I should have 300 of our alumni, put you on their Christmas card list to thank you.
Oh, well, I always like getting a holiday card, but I will tell you, I appreciate that, Bill. Knowing now that it's been 23 years, I remember I had to miss your 20th because I had COVID for the first time. I don't know if you remember, but yeah, so it was probably more like 24 or 25 the first time we sat down for coffee. Yeah. But thank you for saying that. And it's been fun to watch you and what you've created and all of the lives that have been impacted. It's been really, really incredible.
And you look just the same as when I met you 25 years ago, and I have no hair at all, or the whole thing. So,
and you look great. That's for sure.
So thanks for asking me about my background. I'll give a very short version of it, but I grew up in Washington, North Carolina, a small town, USA, a town of about 10,000 people, the first town in America named for George Washington. But it was really a wonderful place to grow up. It was a town where you never locked your doors, where, your parents bumped into your teachers on the street. So a chance meeting in the aisles of the grocery store is where parent-teacher conferences took place. And I really value that time that I had growing up in that small town. A lot of the values that make me, I got, were developed in that little town. So I love that. Went off to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which was the only school that I ever really wanted to go to. I ended up doing a undergrad and PhD at UNC. I've served on the board of trustees. I've received every award you can received there. So I've been really engaged. I hope a lot of the NSCS scholars who are listening to this will take that as an example of, be engaged while you're on campus, but there's also a role that you can play long after you've graduated and left for the benefit of the young people who are coming along behind you and sitting in those same classrooms that you sat in. So I went off to UNC, studied political science, and while I was in class, got really excited about politics, left school, went and worked on a U.S. Senate campaign. The idea was that I was going to go back to school to finish my degree when the campaign ended, but I didn't because I was so excited about politics, and I decided, the heck with that, I'm going to Washington. So I literally hitchhiked to Washington. Your scholars don't even know what hitchhiking is. I hitchhiked to Washington with $5 in my pocket, and it was a crazy situation. I ended up working in the House Post Office from 2:00 in the morning, sorting mail of the members of Congress, 2 a.m. till 8:30. Then I'd wash up in the bathroom, put on a jacket and a tie. And then I would volunteer in a congressman's office from 9 to 3. After that, I'd walk around handing out my resume. And then from 3, that's 3 to 5. After that, I would go to receptions so I could get something to eat. Got to eat sometime. And then when I would leave the receptions, I would go into the Library of Congress and read everything I could about how Congress worked and about the major issues that were being debated at the time. When they would kick me out of the library at midnight, I'd go back into the Rayburn House office building, plop down on a big leather sofa, sit there. I couldn't lay down, but I would sit there for 2 hours and sleep. And then at 2:00, I was back in the post office sorting mail again. And so I would say, don't do what I did. Do go back, finish the degree, and get all your credentials in place before you head out to get your career started.
I did notice when I was reading your book that your story had gotten morphed into a little bit of some of your scholars talking about the fact that you were homeless when you actually, when you arrived in DC, you were homeless. And I thought that was great how you can hear your story. And I guess you could come to that conclusion maybe, but you didn't see it that way.
No, I mean, that's really funny that you picked up on that, because someone said to me, I'll never forget the story you told us about when you were homeless. And I thought, what? Homeless? When was I homeless? And I just thought about how, and I think this is something else for your scholars to really pay attention to, is your own perspective about your situation, your perspective about your own situation. Whereas someone could look at that situation, technically, I was homeless. I didn't have a home. But while someone could look at it as homeless, I looked at it as I was living the dream. It's just the most exciting point of my life. And I didn't think it. And I often wondered after that scholar said that to me, how would life have turned out if I thought of myself as being homeless, as opposed to thinking, wow, this is just the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I really admire about you, is because you do look at everything from the perspective of we create our own greatness and our own opportunities. And I think that is the narrative that weaves throughout your book, and the way that you teach your scholars how to build their connections and to build their network. And when was it that you started understanding the importance of having a network and going out of your way to take the initiative to meet people, even though you don't even know where those like friendships or relationships or things might take you? How did that start coming together for you?
Steve, I have no idea. But I do think that growing up in that small town probably contributed more than anything else to this attitude I have, because as I said, no one was a stranger in that town. And anything I needed, I knew from the beginning that whatever it was I needed, the key to getting it was the people around me. And so I always just felt comfortable in establishing relationships. And not only in that direction, but the other part of it was I somehow, maybe it was my parents who taught me that my job in life was to also be of service to other people, be a resource to other people. So I could see other people as resources for me. And I became very comfortable in just saying, Steve, I'm trying to do this project and maybe you can give me some advice. I felt very comfortable doing that. But by the same token, I also felt very comfortable that if Steve Loflin calls me and says, "Hey, Bill, I need your help with something," the answer automatically is yes. I mean, I don't even have to think about it. Steve's my friend. Steve needs
Mhm.
some help with something or advice or whatever it is. It's only natural that the answer. So one of the things I think I say in the book is, let your default position be yes.
Mhm.
Let your default, when someone asks you for something, unless you know that you absolutely positively can't do it, the answer is yes. Steve, can I tell one little story that's in the book?
Oh yeah, please. I love the
So
book.
it's about a young man named Christopher McKee. So one year, Elijah Hayward graduated from the Institute, graduated from college, went off to Yale Divinity School for grad school. While during his first semester there, I went up to visit him, met everybody, same thing, small town guy. Of course, you're going to go that far, you meet everybody. So I've met the admissions director and the dean and all these people. Fast forward several months and I get a phone call from Christopher McKee. And Chris says, "Dr. Keys," well, it was Mr. Keys back then. Mr. Keys, I'm making a huge mistake." I'm like, "Really? What's that, Chris?" He says, "Well, the Lord's telling me I should be going to divinity school." And I said, "Okay, well, what's the problem?" He says, "I didn't apply to divinity school." And I said, "Well, if the Lord's telling you to go to divinity school, I assume the Lord's got a way of getting you into divinity school." And
Right.
so, to shorten the story, I said, "Chris, you got to go online, download the application, complete the entire thing. You've got to get it done today. I'm going to give you my FedEx number and you've got to ship it to Yale tonight. If you can get that done, then I'm going to call Yale." And so he said, "I can do it." I said, "Okay." So I then call the folks at Yale and I tell them about, started out saying, "How's Elijah?" "Oh, we love Elijah. He's great." And I'm saying, "Well, that's what I thought you were going to say. And if you love Elijah, you're also going to love Chris." Chris, who's Chris? So I tell them this story. And they said, "But the deadlines will pass the whole thing." And I said, "Listen," I said, "I just got off the phone with him. His entire application, his complete application is going to be sitting on your desk when you arrive tomorrow morning. And if you will read his application, you will call me and thank me." So of course they said, if he can do all that in one day, we'll read the application. They did admit him. They did thank me. And a year later, they called me and said, "Okay, well, who do you have for us this year?" And for 6 straight years, Institute alumni went to Yale Divinity School. The 7th year, he decided, our alum decided to go somewhere else. And folks at Yale were like, "Wait, what happened? I thought we had something here," right?
Yeah.
But I tell that story because Chris could have called 100 people and 99 people probably would have said, "Dude, you missed the deadline. What do you want me to
Yeah.
do? You think I'm
Yeah.
some kind of miracle worker?" But one person said, "You know what? If your heart's desire is to go to divinity school, then let me do everything I can to help you get into divinity school."
Yep.
And I tell this story because I want every NSCS scholar to develop this idea that when someone asks me for help, the answer is yes. The
Mhm.
default position is yes, unless you absolutely can't do it. And I want you to make the assumption that you can do things, right? And so I could have said to him, "Chris, I'm not in charge of the application or the admissions process. You missed the deadline." But instead of doing that, I made the phone call. What did it cost me to do it? It didn't cost me anything. But most people just won't do it. And if we can persuade people to develop this "yes, I can" attitude, I think we just get a whole lot further in the world. Here's the other part of it that I want NSCS scholars to understand. And that is, like, I want my scholars to understand. And that is, I made the call.
Mhm.
And the result of that was the following year, they called me. So
Right.
I had zero influence over their process, right? Zero. I'm just the
Mhm.
guy in Washington, D.C., they're in New Haven, Connecticut. What do I have to do with it? Nothing. But I made the phone call. And then
Mhm.
the result was I actually ended up with a lot of influence because I assumed some influence in the first place. And that's what happens in life. If we will just put ourselves out there to try to achieve some things, it turns out that we actually develop influence in places that we didn't really have it before. So,
Yeah. And I think about that, and it's probably why we got along so well from the beginning when we first met, because having worked on college campuses, what I also discovered is so many people on a college campus that should be there to support the students and to help their college experience be amazing tend to live in a world of no.
yeah,
And I always, when I was working on college campuses, had this attitude, and it's what the students I think appreciated about me as an administrator, was I would always be like, well, let's start at yes and work backwards. Because if you start with the yes, you might get to a place where you realize that it's a no, but you don't know unless you actually take that path. And it could have, that's the same as with your talking about the way that you got involved with Yale. Like you could have accepted it as a no just because the deadline is passed, but what's the downside to having that on the desk the very next day? And I think so many people do, I think on both sides of the equation. I think a lot of times students or young alumni will just give up on something just because they believe they've missed a deadline. And deadlines exist for a reason, obviously. So that's important. But there are ways, I think, a lot of times that people really do need to find a way to get what they want. And so I think that's a great story. And it's a really good reminder that it's a journey, life's a journey, and we have to really find our way through to make it the journey we want it to be. So take the initiative. That's definitely for sure. I also know that, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, go ahead.
I think where I tell that story in the book, the title of that chapter is Rules Are for Other People.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Rules for other people. And it doesn't mean that I'm ignoring rules, ignoring the law. That's not what I mean when I say rules for other people. What I mean is, deadlines are artificial. It's like somebody said, okay, like for my own institute, the deadline is January 15th. But if Steve Loflin calls me on January 16th and says, Bill, listen, I know your deadline is passed, but I have this amazing student who I know you would love him and he would be fantastic in your program. Am I not going to listen to that recommendation? Of course, I'm going to say, Steve, thank you so much. Send me his material. I'd love to learn about it. That's the way the world really works, right?
You've actually done that because I've called you before and I said, Bill, I don't remember promoting your program deadline for this year. When is it? And you're like, well, it's actually in 3 days. But, for NSCS, if you let people know, we certainly want to put them into the consideration funnel. So you're exactly doing what you say you do, which is what I really do appreciate about you.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
Well, why would I do that? It's because of our relationship. Because I know that, well, first of all, I have like the utmost admiration for you. And I know, and I trust your judgment. And so here's another lesson for young people, right? Is establish relationships with people so that they know what the quality of human being you are. And then when you need to ask them for, can you give me 2 more days or 3 more days or a week or whatever it is, when you're asking them for something, they're going to say, you know what? John is pretty amazing young man, or Mary is a pretty amazing young woman. And I know she wouldn't be asking me for help with this if there was not a great reason for it. And I trust her judgment and I want to do it to help. But establishing it, this is where you started the conversation, right? And talking about these relationships. I mean, that's why and by the way, Steve, I cannot remember any conversation that we've had over 25 years where we talked about using our relationships or any social capital that we have for our own personal benefit. It's really to benefit other people, right? If you're calling me to ask me for help, it's probably not helping Steve. It's probably helping an NSCS scholar, right?
Yeah,
and
that's true.
The other lesson that you and I are constantly trying to get across to young people. And that is, if we're focused on being helpful to other people, it's almost automatic that we're going to get the things that we want. Our lives are going to be fulfilling if we're other focused instead of just always thinking about what we're going to get for ourselves.
That is 100% true. And you're right. I think that's generally the way we function, is looking out for how do we help the people that we've created these organizations for. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. The other point that you didn't mention, and I remember it from your book, and it's a part of the equation too, is the story that you told about when your father passed away. And on the street, I think you bumped into the dentist, and you
Yeah.
also bumped into the person that was the groundskeeper or someone. And
street sweeper.
yeah, the street sweeper. So I think that says a lot too about where people get their values and how those values are transferred. And I think we live in a world today where I feel like you hear it all the time. Like it's a different era, it's a different time, but I do think values have to come from somewhere.
Sure.
And so when it's, how do you frame that up for people that maybe don't have the ideal family unit that you and I grew up with that had created a lot of things? But how do you get those values when you're in different circumstances?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think it's modeling. We have to model. There's a thing that happens, most summers when I have my scholars with me. One of them will say, Dr. Keys, one of the things I notice about you is you treat everybody the same way. So we will go visit a Supreme Court justice, and you treat the person in the lobby who processed us into the building the same way you treated the Supreme Court justice. And when they say that to me, that they've noticed it, my heart swells because I'm thinking, wow, okay, you get who I am, right? I mean, I'm not one of these people who's going to go suck up to somebody because they have a fancy title and then treat somebody else. By the way, let me say this. So, and I know you are just like I am, Steve. If we were having lunch with a young person at a fancy restaurant and that young person was rude to the server, we'd probably think a lot less of that young person, wouldn't we?
Yeah,
right?
it would definitely.
They're sucking up to us because they think we can do something to them, and then being rude to the server. I'm like,
yep.
Your rudeness to the server really speaks volumes about who you really are, right? And so, just being in the habit of being nice to everyone. The story, that you're mentioning about, the dentist and the street sweeper, was, a few days after my father's funeral, and the dentist said, Billy, I was at Dad's funeral, but I didn't get to stick around afterward and talk to you and your mom because I needed to get back to my office. But your dad was a great man. He was one of the best friends I ever had. And after he said that, there's this other man, this old man, kind of hunched over with this dirty old gray coat, and he's sweeping the streets. And he turned around, he says, "Oh, Billy Keys, I didn't even notice you standing there, but I just heard what Dr. Dowdy said. I was at your dad's funeral too. Your dad was a great man. He was one of the best friends I ever had." And I don't know whether it dawned on me at that moment or whether it was like years later that I realized these two people who were at the opposite ends of our little society both said the same thing about my dad. And so, when someone says to me, "I notice that you treat everybody the same," I guess I'm proud of, I'm like my dad.
It's a legacy, keeping that legacy alive, right?
Keep the legacy alive. But I hope that everybody knows that that's who I am. I'm someone who wants to be kind, thoughtful, and helpful to everyone who I meet, and not just to suck up to people who have fancy titles or people who are in a position where, they can help me in some way.
Well, I've talked to more recruiters than you would imagine that tell the story of people that they take out for meals, just like you said. And the person being interviewed thinks they're going out for a nice lunch or dinner to be interviewed, but they're being observed, just like you said. And the way that they handle themselves at dinner, the way that they treat other people, all of that's a part of the interview process, not just the questions that you're being asked about, how you would be a good employee or what your goals are. It's just the way that you treat people. And I think we've gotten to a place in society where so many people are treated horribly.
Yeah.
And it happens in all kinds of circumstances. But it's not that hard to be kind, right? It's really not. And I just think it seems like you have to make a choice if you're going to treat people one way or the other. So why would you not just go for the kind side of the decision-making process, right? So it's definitely something that I hope that scholars or just anyone in general would sort of take a moment to reflect on the way that they kind of navigate their day and how they tend to treat people throughout the day. Because it does say a lot about your character and your values and what's important to you,
Yep.
which I think is really something that's important. Life is too short not to, do everything you can to try to help people. It's sort of my perspective anyway.
Absolutely.
So when you were,
And
I didn't
that's
even
why
know
we're friends.
yeah, I think that's really true. You are the people that you surround yourself with, right? So it's
Absolutely.
really important to look at things from that angle too. And I didn't even know you were writing a book. Like I know the last time we had lunch, you didn't say anything about your writing a book or the time before that. So when did you decide that it was time to kind of put all of your experience and your stories into one place?
Yeah. So, people always ask, why my institute has been so successful. So, you know this, but others don't. But, one of I only have 300 alumni.
Mhm.
My program is really small, but one of them is is a justice on the New York State Supreme Court. One's
Mhm.
a professor at Duke University. One's a surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital. They're pastors of great churches. They're business people. They're doing all these amazing things. And people say, and by the way, I have 6 proteges who are Rhodes Scholars.
Mhm.
6. That's pretty amazing. So people will say,
That's very amazing.
how do you do this? And I kept thinking about all the different components of the program. I thought, but everybody does all those things. Everybody does internships. Everybody takes classes. Everybody does all. But the one thing that's unique to our program is the conversations that we have around the dinner table, which are very much like the conversation that you and I are having right now about
Mhm.
who you are as a human being. I refer to them as the best and the brightest, and I remind them that best comes before brightest. Right? These
Mhm.
are the conversations. You and I, you've used the word values, right? How do you communicate these values to people? It's in these conversations around the dinner table. And I can't invite everybody to come sit at the dinner table with us, but I could share these conversations through a book. And so that's how this came about. And I have, over the last several years, been pulling out my phone and going to the notes section and just saying, remember the story about this. And I collected all of this material. And at some point I said, okay, it's time to write this book. And I went through all of those notes and it came to about 60,000 words.
Mhm.
And so then it was time to just sit down and turn all of those notes into a coherent book. And I'm so excited that that project got completed and people are
Yeah.
reading those stories now.
Well, I'm certainly excited to promote it to, our members and to everyone that has access to learn more ScholarScoop type things. And you titled it "The Stories They Hear," which I think is great. And I think that really attaches to you just being such an incredible storyteller, right? And you know, I think of every story is attached to an experience, right? So if you're not having experiences, you don't
Yeah.
really have the story to tell.
Yeah.
And it comes through a lot of living and making your way through and accomplishing things. And when you can capture all that and you can share it back to students or people that are young in their career, I guess my perspective on it is that you would hope that they could take your stories and it could catapult them a little further ahead, right? Without maybe having to relive something.
Yeah.
So was it hard? Like you said, you had all of those words captured. Was it hard to really pick the stories that resonated the most? Or did you have to put some stories for your second book over to the side? Or like, how do you choose
Yeah.
the stories that are most crucial for helping
Yeah.
people?
I was able to get just about everything in there. Uh, but it's funny that after the book was finished, I'm driving down the highway thinking, oh man, I just remembered another story that I should have included in there. So I guess there are more stories to come. I'm not sure I'm writing a second book full of stories, but there are more stories. How we selected them. So, I'm an old man, so therefore I do things in kind of an old school way. And I just printed out all of those stories. I
Mhm.
printed them and then I laid them out all over the floor, and started putting things into order that they're in. So you'll remember that there's three chapters about microaggression,
Yep.
right? And it's
Yep.
like, that makes no sense, except that there are three different stories, but the three stories kind of go together, right? And
Yep.
so I said, I'm going to do three chapters on microaggression. There's also a story in the middle of the book called A Word About Me.
Hmm.
And the publisher hired an editor or had an editor. The editor says, I think we ought to put that in the beginning. And I said, no, it's in the middle for a reason. So did you even read it? The first sentence in the chapter is, you probably think it's pretty weird that I'd have a chapter in the middle of a book titled A Word About Me. But here's why I've done this, because I've told you all these stories. Now, if I tell you this about me, it will help you understand why those stories make sense.
Hmm.
So a lot of it was just kind of thinking through, how do I communicate these stories over time? Right.
Yep.
So he wants to put that story at the beginning of the book, but that's not a story I would tell people at the beginning of an actual relationship. Right.
Right.
And
Yep.
so I tried to make it kind of match up with how I tell the stories in real life.
Well, I think I mean, it is a cadence to it, and it's really, I think, effective. And, and because we don't have like the number of hours that we need to really dive into this, I do think that what I appreciated about the book is that you've created a very significant, successful program, the Institute for Responsible Citizenship. And through that program, as you've mentioned, more than 300 African-American men have been impacted in incredibly positive ways. And you've really helped them figure out in so many ways how to navigate through life and make the connections, how to process the microaggressions, which I really appreciated those sections of the book, which we won't get into now, but I would encourage people to read the book, if nothing else for that, to think about how one small thing that may turn you off is really maybe out of context to the whole big picture for what's
Yeah.
going on, and how many things you miss out on just because you latch onto one thing that might have bothered you just a little bit, but there's so much more to it. There's just a lot of substance here that I think would really help people. And so I'm going to encourage everyone, we're going to include the link for the book. And I do think if you take some time to read the book, wherever you are in your kind of life experience, there is something here that I think by reading this will help you become a better person in a lot of ways. So I appreciate you taking the time to put all of this together. I will say, as we need to wrap up, I love the tagline that you chose, expecting greatness as the key to success. And do you think that most people generally don't go into something expecting greatness? I think you have to tell people that, right? Because I don't know that
No
people
question
go
about
for it.
Yeah, no question about it. And, I appreciate what you said a second ago. This book really can benefit anyone. You don't just have to be an African-American male college student.
Right.
You can be white, Asian, whatever,
Yep.
male, female, college, high school, early
Yep.
career. You could not be the person that it's directed to. You could be the professor, the teacher, the program director, the scout troop leader, the youth pastor. I mean, whatever it is, I think these stories, would be beneficial for a wide variety of people. Um, but the stories they hear, if you talk about African-American men in particular, I think in so many ways, people make excuses for them to be mediocre. And I tell them, people will make excuses for your mediocrity before you've even attempted to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Don't want to belabor this story, but there was a large Midwestern university that invited me out probably a decade ago. And they said, our African-American men are just not doing well. We can't figure out what the problem is. Could you at least come out and observe and tell us what you think? And I agreed to do it. I went out and was there for a couple of days. And then I had a meeting with the provost and some deans and professors. And I said, I think I understand what the problem is. And they were like, you've been here 2 days and you know the problem? I said, yeah, these young men are living up to your low expectations. And they were shocked. And one example was, I said, listen, why are you not expecting them and requiring them to work a lot harder? And there was a professor who said, well, I just feel like if I push them to work any harder, I will drive them away. And I said, really? And I said, you have a football team, right? Knowing, of course, that they did.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. I said, do you think the football coach makes the players work hard? And she says, oh, they work so hard. And, she goes on. And I said, how about a basketball team? Same thing. Oh, they work so hard. I can't believe how hard they work. I said, so let me get this straight. You think if you take a young Black man and you make him work extremely hard for physical pursuits, he can thrive in that environment. But if you expect him to work really hard for intellectual pursuits, you'll drive him away. And then I just didn't speak. And the silence was deafening because that's indefensible, right?
Yes.
And you expect, and I also said, listen, how have you spoken to me about these students? I mean, you say many of them come from poor inner city schools where they're not really prepared to do this work. I said, your university must be different from any university I went to. I said, I cannot imagine my professors knew where I went to high school and the quality of. You're making assumptions about them, right?
And excuses.
Exactly, right? And you're giving them excuses before they've even attempted to do anything for them to be mediocre in your class. They're living up to your low expectations. So that's why that subtitle is there. Expecting greatness is the key to success. But Steve, let me tell you one other thing. After I wrote the book and we had the subtitle and the whole thing is in print, I realized that success is not what I'm going for. The young men and women who are members of NSCS are already successful. That's why they're in the organization. My scholars are already successful. That's why we admitted them. We're going for something different, which is we want them to not just be successful. We want them to be difference makers. So what I'm saying is when you walk into the room, I want that room to never be the same again. Right? That's what I'm talking about. I want you to be the person who someone says, I need to get into Yale Divinity School, but I didn't submit the application on time. I want you to be the person who says, well, let me see if I can help. Right? I want you to be the person who's, on the Supreme Court, who is doing everything possible to make sure that we live in a just society. Right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we're in. And that's a level way above success. Right. So for NSCS members, that's the idea. Not that you're just going to graduate from college and get a good job, but that you're going to use all of that as tools for you to make a difference in the world.
Because you're exceptional and we believe you come into a community of other exceptional people and you build this network that can be supportive to do the things you're talking about. Because it'll be the person that's the dean at a school that you have NSCS or the Institute in common with, so you can be helpful to other people that might want to leverage that. Well, I do think as we wrap up that one of the things that has been great to watch and observe you over all these years and hearing you tell these stories is that you've modeled this, because I can only think of you as the young Black man coming to Washington, with $5 and hitchhiking your way there. And you worked very hard. Like you were exceptional in the ways that you tackled getting the opportunities that you wanted to get and to be able to do the things that you wanted to do. And I see so many students today that need to hear that and to need to understand that you're not entitled to things. You have to work for things. You have to put the time and the effort and the energy and be kind in the process. So thank you for all the ways that you're changing the world, Bill. You're an amazing person. So thank you for doing this for us today.
Thank you. I mean, this is fantastic. And probably anybody who's paying attention to this will understand why you and I could sit down for lunch and, before we finish, it's time for them to bring the dinner.
Exactly. That's usually how it goes. So thank you, Bill, for your friendship. And I hope that book does extremely well. And we're certainly going to be promoting this. And I think anyone who reads it will certainly have a bit more of a map for how they can be successful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.